Hello, everyone. My name is Stanley St. Rose, and today we're going to be talking about the Bible. Now, in order to really understand literature, in order to understand everything that happens in literature, you have to understand the Bible in a very thorough manner. A lot of Western writers, a lot of European writers, when they write famous novels, they draw upon stories and concepts and ideas that come from the Bible. So I'm going to be creating a series of videos that kind of focuses on the Bible or Bible stories. I'm still going to be doing my other book videos and summaries. But in order to understand philosophy better, to understand Western philosophy, European philosophy, or just world philosophy in general, you have to understand the Bible because a lot of early philosophers, a lot of early writers, and even still today, a lot of writers read the Bible or use the Bible to learn how to read and write. Before formal education was established in America or in many places of the world, the only text that a lot of people could get it was the Bible. And so a lot of people learn how to read and write from the Bible. A lot of people learn how to they learn grammar from the Bible and their vocabulary from the Bible. And so the Bible shows up in many different ways in a lot of different types of literature. When you look at Dante's Inferno, you find of course you find a lot of religious ideas and thoughts in Dante's Inferno. You find it in the novel East of Eden. I mean, the title is called East of Eden, and that's directly from the Bible. Even Moby Dick, even though it's not about the Bible, it's not about Bible concepts, there are certain scenes and certain places within the novel. It's an extremely long novel, and there are certain places in it where there are ideas that could be interpreted for something that's just straight out of the Bible. And so a lot of these greater authors, they know of the Bible, they studied the Bible, or they use it as kids to learn how to read, and so it kind of seeps into their writing here and there. If you live in the Western world, if you live in America, if you live in Europe, and in many different places in the world, the Bible's everywhere. It's in sitcoms, it's in movies, ideas come from it, thoughts come from it, the way societies functions come from it. If you go to any hotel in America, you're gonna find a Bible in your hotel room. It's everywhere. Even if you're not talking about it, not thinking about it, even if you're not a Christian, you're not religious, you're going to see, hear, or think about Bible concepts. It's just entrenched in many countries, in many constitutions. It's just, you can't escape it. You're going to face Bible concepts, Bible ideas, Christianity, in everything in America or just in the world in general. So to understand literature in a better way, in a deeper way, you have to think about it and look at the Bible. So what we're going to be doing in this video, we're going to talk about the Adam and Eve. We're going to talk about the story about Adam and Eve. And we're going to talk about the deeper meaning, but we're not going to look at it like a sermon. It's going to be the Bible as literature, it's a very cool way to look at the Bible. So the story of Adam and Eve, basically what you get in it is that God creates the universe, and after he creates the universe, he creates the earth, the land, the seas, and the sky, and he kind of like sets these laws for them. After God creates all of these things, he kind of gives them their own set of laws, like what they can do, what the universe can do, what the skies can do, what the seas can do, what the land can do. So he kind of sets parameters for all these types of things. The Bible doesn't talk about science. It doesn't talk about atoms and it doesn't go in terms of physics or science, because if the Bible included that hundreds and 2,000 years ago, nobody would understand it, because science, to the human race, science is something that's actually very new. 300 years ago, 400 years ago, surgery wasn't a thing. If you got sick, if you got ill, nobody knew about antibiotics or penicillin or any of the scientific breakthroughs that we've had. 300 years ago, 400 years ago, if you got sick, if you had a life-ending illness, it was a life-ending illness. It wasn't like a life-ending illness that you could probably work out a plan with your doctor and be cured. If you had a life-ending illness 300 years ago, that was it, that was your life. And so the Bible didn't include any of that. but it doesn't mean that science or scientific ideas doesn't fit into the Bible or into how the Bible functions. Now, God creates Adam and Eve. He puts them in the garden. Now, keep in mind that Adam and Eve, they are in paradise. They're on earth without sin. There's no sin on earth at this point. So Adam and Eve are these perfect human beings. They're not sick. There's no illnesses, no nothing. They're just perfect human beings. They're naked. They exist, which is really fascinating. Like the Bible tells us that Adam is born out of the dust of the earth, or not born. He's created out of the dust of the earth, and God breathes from the air from his nostrils. He breathes into Adam. Adam comes to life. Then he says later that man shouldn't be alone, and he puts Eve there in the garden with Adam, which that just becomes woman, man and wife, husband and wife. And they're set there to reproduce, to live in paradise, to live with God, which is really fascinating because in the Bible, nobody else can really see God. Adam and Eve are really, the only humans to see God and survive. Other individuals, holy individuals in the Bible, whenever they come close to seeing God, they either burn, or they just die because, you're not holy enough to be in the presence of God. And a great example of that is the Holy of Holies within the Bible, because in the Holy of Holies, if you went in there and you weren't holy, they actually sent you in there for a rope tied to your leg. So if you go into the Holy of Holies, this is deep into the Bible. If you go into the Holy of Holies and you're not pure, you're not that one of the high priests, or you're not the high priest that's dedicated or that's reserved to go into the Holy of Holies, you're going to pretty much just drop dead by entering the Holy of Holies, and they would have to pull you out with the rope because, you're not holy enough to be in the presence of God. So, anybody that comes close to the presence of God and who is sinful, or just mankind in general, you're going to die. Adam and Eve are the only human beings that were alive, that were clean, that were not sin, that didn't have sin with them, and they could see God, because the Genesis tells us that Adam and Eve were in the garden and they walked with God. They were with God, so they could see the presence of God, which is very fascinating. Now, going away from the Bible, there are some other, in terms of literature, in terms of what makes this interesting in terms of literature. If you do some research, there are some, I guess it's not really I guess you can say a conspiracy theory or an addition to this, or maybe it's not an addition to this, but there is rumored to be this woman named Lilith that was in the garden before Eve, and she was the first woman, but her story, there's not really factual evidence to this, and there's no way of going about proving this about Lilith's existence, because the story of her is that she was in the garden before Eve. She didn't listen to Adam. She left the garden and went out into the world. And then Eve was created after her, and Eve was Adam's wife, and Lilith just went out on her own. So that's a side story of the Bible. There's a bunch of side stories that exist in the world of the Bible, but that's just there. So Adam and Eve, they're in the garden, they're living, they have dominion all over the animals. And what's really fascinating here is, in terms of philosophy, Adam is the first man to recognize or to understand that he exists. Existentialism is something that is, very important to humans. We think about our lives, meaning, why we exist, why, life is life. Animals in the animal kingdom, they eat, they reproduce, they survive, they know how to exist and how to thrive. And they're not aware of their existence and aware of the universe around them and aware of the planet around them. We humans, we are conscious, we know that we exist, we know that we are alive, we know that there's a universe around us and that we're not, it's not just one planet. We know that there's so many planets and universes and stars and things that exist in this universe that, it's literally impossible to pretty much go throughout all of it. We don't know if it's infinite or not. there's a lot of questions to be asked about that. But the thing is, like, we can, I maybe you can debate it, but I don't think you can debate it. But we're the only animals or the only beings on Earth that have the ability to think about all of that, about our existence, about the meaning of why we exist, of why we are alive. And I guess you can say existentialism, the search for meaning, the search for purpose in human life. It all began with Adam. So that's Adam right there. So Adam and Eve, they're in the garden. They can see God. They don't have to farm or do anything because at that time, Garden of Eden is paradise. The trees take care of themselves. They just grow fruits and whatever they have to grow. The animals are not attacking or not devouring Adam. I mean, Adam and Eve are naked walking in this garden, and all the animals of the earth are in the garden, and everybody's safe. There's no worry. There's no, everybody's happy because this is paradise, and everything's just wonderful. And then what happens, as everybody knows, literally everybody and their mom knows in the world that Eve has this conversation with a serpent. The serpent tells Eve that you can eat the fruit from the tree of good and evil, which is very fascinating. That's the one part of the Bible that is very, very fascinating to me, because in the Garden of Eden, you have the tree of good and evil, and you have the tree of life. Now, one of the reasons why humans get kicked out of the Garden of Eden is that they ate from the tree that has the fruit of good and evil. So by Eve and Adam eating from the tree of good and evil, they are now aware of what's good and what's evil. You have to think, before that, humans were just pure. There was no, there was no separation, or we didn't have to know the difference between good and evil because we were just pure, right? Adam and Eve lived in the garden and they didn't want to kill each other for goods and or riches. Humankind, it's all about what we can gain, what we can do. It's about conquering. It's about wealth. And I mean, just look at human history and all the bloody wars and the colonization, imperialization, and all of the conquerors, the Roman Empire, Genghis Khan, and all these types of wars that we've had over the years, over territory, over money, over wealth, over power, over economic battles. It's because we have knowledge of good and evil. In the garden, Adam and Eve, they were just pure. They weren't competing for anything. And one of the reasons why God kicks Adam and Eve out of the garden is because, yes, now, since they ate from the tree of good and evil, if they eat from the tree of life, they could live eternally. So they would just become unstoppable because they would have the ability to know what's the difference between good and evil. And then if they eat from the tree of life, they would live forever. They would never die. So humans would have the ability to sin forever if God let them stay in the garden, eat from the tree of good and evil, and also eat from the tree of life. That would make them live forever, sin forever, do whatever, and have no consequences or boundaries, because it's the tree of good and evil plus the tree of life. That's just a method for disaster, because imagine a world where no one ever died. You could do whatever you want. I mean, there isn't really a punishment, because when you take away that idea that you're going to die one day, and if you're not going to die, that means your body is safe from everything. Car crashes, illnesses, whatever disease, whatever thing you could think of that could kill somebody. If you could live forever, all of those would be nothing. And thus there would be no consequences, because the human race, we go through a lot to protect ourselves. We have doctors and hospitals and all types of different functions and different technologies to protect ourselves. It's because we know that our mortality is, that's real. And our bodies can be destroyed, or we could be killed in so many different ways, because, at the end of the day, we're just big bags of water walking around, and if it get punctures, or I guess if you shake it too much, if you hit it too much, it just stops working. So that's why Adam and Eve really gets kicked. They get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. They get punishments, and it's not just punishments for them; it's punishments for the entire human race. And after that, God tells Adam and Eve that the ground would not produce for them anymore, and that they would have to work and work with the sweat of their foreheads to, you know, eat and survive and exist. And the things like it all comes from the conversation that Eve has with the serpent, that basically tells her, go eat from the tree of good and evil, and you would have knowledge like God and know the difference from good and evil like God does. And so this all takes place. Adam and Eve, they get kicked out of the garden. And what's another fascinating thing about this is that God doesn't destroy the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden exists somewhere on earth. God even he basically locks the garden and pretty much puts a security system on it. There are pretty much angels there protecting it. And no man, God pretty much gives his angels the command that if any man ever tries to get into the Garden of Eden, if we could even find it, to just destroy them. So the Garden of Eden is a place that still exists, and it's somewhere on Earth. If anybody could find it, well, if you find it, it would be really hard to get in. So that happens, and that's really how the Adam and Eve, their story takes place. That's how Adam and Eve get kicked out, and we know that God tells man that he has to work hard for his food and for his keep and for his earning, and then women get birth pains, or the pain of having children just gets extremely harder. And we know that to be the case because there's so many literature that exists in the world of women dying, and just birth just goes wrong and they bleed to death, and just giving birth is something it's really not fun, and it's kind of fascinating because you kind of see the truth in that, because only the human race has so much problems with giving birth, because I don't really see every other animal in the animal kingdom, or every other being on earth, pretty much creating specialized hospitals and systems to make sure that birth is precise and correct. That's something that's pretty much with humans only, that a lot of women die around the world still to this day. Even in the 21st century, a lot of women die all over the world, and even in first world countries, by giving birth, because it's painful, it can kill you, and it's documented everywhere. So that's what happens that's the punishments that Adam and Eve get. They get kicked out of paradise. Here's another novel, Paradise Lost. It has a lot of religious and Bible ideas from there. So Adam and Eve lose Paradise Lost. They lose their paradise. Well, they lose their paradise. They are humans. They've sinned, and that's what happens to them. And there's just the amount of literature, the amount of ideas that come from the story of Adam and Eve is just ridiculous. And there's so much of it because, there's so much literature about, women costing man paradise. That's a genre of literature of how women destroy the happiness of men. That's a genre of literature that you see in a lot of different ways of entertainment and films and books. One of I guess you can say one gag or one part of humor that exists in the world is that once a man gets married, he's pretty much nagged by his wife forever, and that becomes kind of like torment. And there's different philosophical works and philosophical pieces about the story of Adam and Eve and how it applies to our world. And then the story of Lilith is something that's it's not really well known, but it's significant as well, because the reason why Lilith leaves the garden is because she did not follow Adam's rules and laws. So that's very fascinating. So that story, story of Adam and Eve, very significant. Has a lot to do with the way the Western world works, how we picture the family. For years, a lot of people cited the story of Adam and Eve to keep women in the kitchen, to keep women obedient and not equal. And that's fascinating onto itself, because a lot of women themselves have used it in the past before, you're getting the women's movement and women empowerment and women equality, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, women were keep using the story of Adam and Eve to tell women that they shouldn't be equal to men and that they should be obedient. I mean, a lot of churches still around the world won't let women preach. I mean, most people, when they see women preach in a church, they leave. So, this story, this Bible story, has a lot to do with our world. If you're religious, it has to do a lot with our existence and what it means to be alive, and why we're not in paradise anymore. And it's just fascinating. There's so much more that could be said about this and how it applies to literature and how much literature has been written about it. But I think this video has gone long enough. Those are my thoughts of the story of Adam and Eve. This will help you understand a lot of literature, a lot of text, a lot of philosophy. That's what I had to say about it. Please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment, and I'll see you guys in my next video.